Good morning, everyone. If you are able, please stand for the reading of God's Word. Again, I'll be reading from the book of Hebrews, chapter 10, verses 8 through 10. Previously saying, sacrifice and offering, burnt offerings and offerings for sin, you did not desire, nor had pleasure in them, which are offered according to the law. Then he said, Behold, I have come to do your will, O God. He takes away the first, that he may establish the second. By that will we have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ, once for all.
Number 243. Some glad morning when this life is o'er, I away to on God's blessed shore. I away, oh glory, I away. When I hallelujah by and by, I'll fly away. When the shadow rises like a throne, I'll fly away. Like a bird from Prince Mars and flown, I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory, I'll fly away. When I hallelujah by and by, I'll fly away. Just a few more weary days and then I'll fly away. To a land where joys never end, I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory, I'll fly away. When I hallelujah by and by, I'll fly away. Mark your book to 690 will be our song of invitation. 690. Then if you would turn back to 656. Now Chris will turn it over up. Worthy of praises, Christ our Redeemer. Worthy of glory, honor, and power. Worthy of honor, adoration. Worthy art thou, worthy art thou. Worthy of riches, blessings, and honor. Worthy of wisdom, glory, and power. Worthy of earth and heaven's thanksgiving. Worthy art thou, worthy art thou. Lift up the voice in praise and devotion. Saints of all earth be for and should bow. Angels in heaven worship and say, worthy art thou, worthy art thou. Worthy of riches, blessings, and honor. Worthy of wisdom, glory, and power. Worthy of earth and heaven's thanksgiving. Worthy art thou, worthy art thou. Worthy come thee, for they receive. Filled with thy spirit, wisdom and power, may we ascribe thee glory and honor. Worthy art thou, worthy art thou, worthy of riches, blessings and honor, worthy of wisdom, glory and power, worthy of earth and heaven's thanksgiving. Worthy art thou, worthy art thou.
Good morning, church. There it is. It's always a pleasure to be out on a Sunday morning. I don't know where summer went. It was just here yesterday. So yesterday we went out and about, and it was 63 degrees, and we went down to the lake and let the kids play on the little beach there at Dale Hollow, and then we got in the car and we went to Albany, and it was cold in Albany. Sometime between the time we left the Day Youth Center at Dale Hollow and we got to Albany, it became cold. And then we got home and it got colder. And then I decided to come over here and accidentally delete half of my sermon and rewrite it in the building before I went back home to go to bed. And when I did that, it was even colder, and I did not have a jacket. So it's been interesting. I woke up this morning, and as another member said, we had to get out our winter gear, our Eskimo coats, and come to service because it's just too cold out there right now. But it happens, and hopefully it will warm up again, and it will, obviously. This morning, our sermon title is A Snake, a Captain, and a Blind Man. Now, I bet you somebody's heard a joke that started that way at some point in their lives. It's one of the most common themes in humor is to have three people from different backgrounds who show up at a place, and then comedy ensues, whatever it may be. We're not going to be talking about a joke this morning, obviously. It just kind of sounds like it every time you say it, when you say a snake, a captain, and a blind man. What we're going to be talking about is a question that many of us as Christians have struggling times answering. When someone says, how do you show how God has always offered salvation from the beginning of the Bible until the present day? And we try to talk about that, what's called the scheme of redemption. And in classes, and if you go to Bible college, or if you just go to a college that happens to be associated with a church, one of the classes they encourage you to take is scheme of redemption. And it starts in Genesis and ends in Revelation, and it shows you God's forgiving patterns from the beginning of time until the present day. And we try to tell people that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever, right? But how is it that we have different covenants and different rules and different things, and then we still say God is the same? Well, we're going to look at three different accounts from Scripture to show you that God is the same. We're going to look at the brazen serpent at the time of the wandering in the wilderness with Moses. We're going to look at a gentleman named Naaman, who we all know is the most famous leper in the Bible, who when I was a child thought it was a leopard in the Bible. I thought, wow, that's a cool cat named Naaman. How would he get any cat to dip in the river 7 times? I had no idea. And we're going to look at a blind man in the city next to the pool of Siloam so that we can see what happened with him. And as we look at those, then we're going to look at our condition today. And we're going to see it's very similar, the things that go on. In fact, we're going to analyze these together. And you've got a little chart in your bulletin, okay? And this is based on a chart that I've seen online before. And in that little chart, you got little spaces you're going to fill out. You're going to fill out the condition of each of the people. That condition is there. The state of that person. Are they helpless, hopeless, in full faith, or whatever's going on? We're going to see the messenger that gave them their advice. We're going to see the provision that was laid out for them so that they could find what they were looking for, the instructions that were given, and whether or not they were obedient and how that looked. And we're going to look at the results of obedience in the cases where they were obedient. We're going to see where the power came from to give them what they desired, and we're going to see the formula of each. And I'm telling you, as hard as this sounds when you're looking at it, it's going to be easy as we go along. But we're going to look at all of those things together. And as we do, you're going to start to see a pattern form in the Old Testament. You're going to see how God works in his ways. I know a lot of people like to say God works in mysterious ways. But I'm going to tell you, God is very open about how he does things. And he has been since the beginning. And you're all going to see that by the end of this sermon today. And don't worry, Harvey will not have to pull out the rabbit. It's not as long as you anticipate. So let's start off with a snake. Now, I know my wife is very happy that we're starting off the sermon with snakes. And she is just like Indiana Jones, you know, in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where he said snakes. Why did it have to be snakes? This comes from Numbers chapter 21, verses 4 through 9. That's the whole account of the brazen serpent in the Old Testament. To begin with, in the first 6 verses, this is how the story unfolds. It says, as they journeyed from Mount Hor by way of the Red Sea to go around the land of Edom, and the soul of the people became very discouraged on the way, and the people spoke against God and against Moses. Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there is no food and no water, and our soul loathes this worthless bread. If you have the King James, I think it says this worthless manna. And we know manna came straight from heaven. So the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, and many of the people of Israel died. I know, we're just bringing it up on a high note, right? Snakes in the camp because a whole bunch of people didn't like what they were eating. You know, I've never met a person who was ungrateful for free food. Yes, I have. That happens quite often. Sometimes people just are not thankful for what they have. They want something better, and they kind of get a little bit disgruntled. In the wilderness, they got very disgruntled. Not only did they speak against Moses, but they talked against God. And that was the last straw for them. So their condition was snake bite. They were bitten. That snake bite could kill them. I believe that state is hopeless. Even today, there are snakes that if you don't get antivenom within the first few minutes, you're not going to make it. And there are snakes that don't have antivenom because there's just no way to get it. You're just done for if you get bit by these snakes. And other snakes where there is antivenom, you need it within a certain amount of time for treatment. Otherwise, it becomes fatal. And we know that there's always something there, but snake bites can become hopeless. If you're out walking in the wilderness and you don't have a snake bite kit with you or anything else to go with you, if you don't have cell service and you get bit by a venomous serpent and you know you are hours away from treatment, you might feel hopeless as well. They weren't just hours away from treatment. There was none. The serpents were sent by God. God designed this serpent especially to be fatal. So there was no way they could stop it. They could not build traps. They could not build walls. They could not dig ditches to trap the snakes. They couldn't just sit there and kill them all as they came. If they did, more would be. More would be sent over and over and over again until God's justice was satisfied. So we go to Numbers chapter 21, verse 7. It says, therefore the people came to Moses and said, we have sinned, for we have spoken against the Lord and against you. Pray to the Lord that he take away the serpents from us. So Moses prayed for the people. Our messenger in this case is Moses. Moses does the right thing. Unlike many people today, he went directly to God. How many times is going to God the very last thing that we do? I have met Christians who are so frustrated about things, and they tried everything in every way to get it done in their own way, and then they finally went, well, I guess I better pray about it. Shouldn't you have started that way? I mean, how many times have we tried everything else before we prayed? I'm as guilty as the next person. I'm so guilty of doing that sometimes. I wrote an entire sermon once called, When All Else Fails, Pray. And of course, the title is meant to make you think. And I might have to preach it one day. You never know. But we should start praying from the beginning. Now, in verses 8 and 9, to wrap up the account, it says, then the Lord said to Moses, Make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole, and it shall be that everyone who is bitten, when he looks at it, shall live. So Moses made a bronze serpent and put it on a pole. And so it was, if a serpent had bitten anyone, when he looked at the bronze serpent, he lived. Our provision was a snake. This was not an idol. It was not meant to be worshipped. It was not meant to be bowed down to. That's why later on they had saved the bronze serpent in the wilderness and put it in the temple and were worshiping it, and it had to be destroyed by King Hezekiah. They found out, whoops, we're still doing something wrong. But it wasn't meant for that. There was no power in the serpent. It was just a stick and a snake. And the instructions were to look. Look at the serpent on the pole. That's all you have to do is look. And I remember that little posting that Paul had shared, that Harvey had shared, that had the guy in his tent that had been snake bit. And he said, all you have to do is look at the serpent. And he was not looking at the serpent dying, saying, oh, Lord, I believe that I could be healed. I'm just not doing anything about it. But they had to look. And those who had obedience looked. If they had been snake bitten, they looked to the brazen serpent. And what was the outcome? The results is that they lived. There was either salvation or death. And if you looked at the serpent, you had salvation. Now, the power, of course, was not in the snake. The power was not in Moses. Moses didn't do it. He just followed the instructions. It was not in the person who looked on the snake itself. It wasn't that he had the right amount of faith or the right kind of faith. It was God. And the power was God. No one else. So what is the formula for salvation in Numbers chapter 21? If we really look at it, what does it take to be saved? And here's that basic formula. Belief. They had to believe if they looked at the snake, they would be healed. Plus obedience. They looked. That's obedience. So belief plus obedience equaled healing. In this case, it was healing from poison and death. But the basic formula in Numbers 21 is belief added to obedience can equal healing. So we move on to a captain. There he is, all wrapped up in bandages. We know our brother Nathan, right? Naaman is it's just an interesting kind of character in the Bible, isn't he? Now, this entire account happens in 2 Kings chapter 5, and it's the first 14 verses. We're not going to read all 14 today. We're going to kind of highlight through it. I encourage you to write down all those verses and go back and read it together because the account is very important. It says, beginning in verse 1, now Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great and honorable man in the eyes of his master, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was also a mighty man of valor, but a leper. God used him greatly and mightily, and used him to help exact judgment on Samaria. But it didn't mean he didn't have flaws. It didn't mean he worshiped God. And as you read through this account, you can see he worships idols more than he worships God in the way that he talks about things. But when it gets down to it, his big problem was leprosy. Now, that's his condition. Leprosy. Hansen's disease. We call it something really cute today. Oh, it's not leprosy, it's Hansen's disease. That sounds a lot better, doesn't it? I don't know, that sounds just as ominous in my mind. And it was first cured by medicine in 1941. What does that mean? His state was hopeless. How do we know his state was hopeless? Because he lived in 851 BC, which is 2,792 years before treatment could ever happen. Unless he had the longest wait in the doctor's office known to man. He could not make it out of this without aid from God. Now, I've heard the argument that this was not like modern leprosy. It was a different skin condition. It was wholly different than what we see in Hansen's disease today. And if it is, it is. It's fine. It was still incurable. It was still deadly. It was still horrible, whichever type of leprosy this was. So we go to 2 Kings 2 through 4. It says the Syrians had gone out on raids and had brought back a captive young girl from the land of Israel. She waited on Naaman's wife. Then she said to her mistress, if only my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria, for he would heal him of his leprosy. And Naaman went and told his master, saying, thus and thus said the girl who is from the land of Israel. So what's going on now? he finds out that there can be a way to get rid of his leprosy. Now they write to the king of Samaria, and the king gets the letter and finds out that Naaman wants to get healed of leprosy and sends him a letter, and the king's a little distraught because who is he that he could heal leprosy? And he tears his clothes and he gets basically to a point of distress, and he thinks Syria is setting him up, kind of like in Return of the Jedi. It's a trap. Right? That's what he thinks is going on. And Elisha's there, and Elisha says in verse 8 of 2 Kings 2, it says, "Why have you torn your clothes? Please let him come to me, and he shall know that there's a prophet in Israel." He says, "Don't be upset. We can take care of this." So the messenger, there's actually two. The first is this servant girl who made it known to her master. And the second, of course, is Elisha, who would actually go out and give the message. And Elisha's message was very simple. We find this in 2 Kings 2:10. Elisha sent a messenger to him saying, "Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored to you, and you shall be clean." That word clean is important. Leprosy was an unclean condition. You had to be separated from everyone. So even if he was a captain and commander of many men, he couldn't stay with his men. He couldn't probably go and live with his family. He probably had to live outside of there for fear that his family would catch it. And in Israel, uncleanliness meant you were removed from camp and separated from everything. And so that word means a little bit more to Elisha than I think it does to Naaman. But Naaman got mad. Why was Naaman mad? He said, "Why didn't he come out and do some great show and heal me and wave his arms around and do all of these things?" He was waiting for, Benny Hinn to walk out and take his jacket off and smack him with it, knock him over, and then he would stand up and have no leprosy. Or he's waiting for Kenneth Copeland to come by and see him in his wheelchair and kick his wheelchair over and go, "One day you're going to get off the floor and walk." That actually did happen, by the way. That's what Naaman was looking for. And it didn't happen. And then he says, "I'd rather go back to Syria, to Damascus, where there's actually clean water." Now, if you've ever seen the Jordan River, it's awful. It is not the river you want to jump in and swim in, because it's kind of like the Ohio River. I wouldn't go in there and eat anything that exists in there, but I had to go in there once to baptize someone, and all the white parts of my shirt were brown when we came out of the water. That's how dirty it is. And that's how I imagine as bad as the Jordan River would be. But he was convinced to do what he was asked because his men said something important. They said, "Hey, listen, if he'd asked you to do something great, would you not have done it? Why won't you do something so simple?" And a lot of times we get that mentality. Something great we would do, but something so simple that would cause us to have what we need, we just won't do that. That's too easy. So the provision was to dip 7 times in the Jordan. That was what he was given. In 2 Kings 2:14, it says he went down and dipped 7 times in the Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God. His flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. Like the flesh of a little child means he didn't just get his leprosy removed, he was given new skin. Leprosy, even cured today, leaves horrible scarring. He didn't leave him with horrible scars. He gave him his flesh back. So it would be as if he never had leprosy to begin with. His obedience, he dipped himself. He immersed himself 7 times. It's as if we put him in the baptistry and dunked him 7 different times. Fully under. I think my dad threatened to do that with me when I got baptized. He just held me down under the water, I swear, for 5 minutes. I think he just wanted me to know what I was getting myself into. But the results of his obedience was his skin was made new. Completely new, completely good. And the power was not in the river. The river was just water, right? The power was in God and what God asked him to do. So we get another formula. Let's look at this formula. He believed that if he went into the river Jordan 7 times, that he would be healed. He was obedient. He went into the river Jordan. He dipped himself 7 times, and he was healed. So the formula in this case is belief plus obedience equals healing. This time from incurable disease. Now we get to our blind man. This is an interesting account here in John chapter 9, verses 1 through 7. The first 5 verses start out like this. It says, "Now Jesus passed by. He saw a man who was blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus answered, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. So he was born blind so that God could be glorified. And it says, I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Now remember that phrase, because it just kind of blends this all together. But his condition was blindness. Blindness was something we know from this text he had since birth. He wasn't getting away from it. So his state was again hopeless. In 2025, there was a gene therapy introduced that successfully restored sight to young children who were born with a certain genetic condition that caused blindness. That is the legitimate, cataloged first time someone born blind has gotten restored sight. Now, there were other examples over time. Somebody said in the 1840s, there was a gentleman who, through an accident, an industrial accident, had received sight. Another surgeon claimed that he was able to make sight in people that were blind. None of these were ever verified. They could be real or they may not be real. But what we know from the most verified source, he was 1,992 years too early for medical help with his blindness, because this is AD 33. What's he going to do except listen to the person who's talking at this point? Thankfully, the messenger is Jesus. I'm sure if Jesus says to do something, we would just do it, wouldn't we? This man was legitimately going to be shown that the world needed light, and Jesus was going to show the darkness, that there was light in the world. Absolutely, at this moment, because all this man saw was darkness, and the light was going to enter his eyes for the first time from the light of the world. So in verses 6 and 7, it says, when he had said these things, he spat on the ground and made clay with saliva, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. Now I know what half of you are thinking. All that blind man heard was, and he probably jumped out of the way. Thankfully, he didn't run away. And he said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. So his instructions, wash the clay off your eyes. I'm going to rub some stuff on your eyes. Now go wash it off. Simple instructions. And his obedience is he washed the clay from his eyes. Now I'm going to tell you right now, if someone spits on the ground, makes clay, and puts it on my face, I'm going to wash it off. Okay? But that's because I don't like it. He did it because he was asked to do it specifically. And the result was, as it says, he went and washed and came back seeing. So he wasn't just legally blind now, where he could see shapes and colors. It wasn't that he could, had maybe nearsightedness or maybe he had farsightedness or he had a bad astigmatism or something like that. He had sight. And the power was not in the clay. And the power was not in the pool. Where did the power come from? It was God. So the formula of the blind man was very simple. He believed that if he washed the clay off his eyes, he would see. He was obedient. And his belief plus his obedience equaled healing. In this case, healing from blindness. Now, have you started to see a pattern in all of these accounts? So what about us today? In Mark chapter 16 and verse 16 at the very beginning, it says, he that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. I think it's very simple instruction. Our condition we can find in Romans chapter 3 verse 23. It says, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So our common condition today is sin. Sin separates us from God. Sin makes us dead in the eyes of God. And we cannot remove our own sin. Only God can do that for us. So our state, according to Ephesians 2:12, outside of Christ is hopeless. It says that in that time you were without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel and strangers from the covenant of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. Outside of Christ, you have absolutely no hope. Our messenger, thankfully, like the blind man at the pool, is Jesus Christ. In John 14:6, Jesus said to them, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. He is the last messenger we need in anything. And the provision he gave us was for remission of sins. In Matthew 26:28, it says, "For this is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many for remission of sins." So that's what he's offering. And his instructions are easy. In Mark chapter 16 to verse 16, like we said, it reads, "He who believes and is baptized will be saved, but he who does not believe will be condemned." So baptism is required. It's part of the offer of salvation. And the results, according to Acts 22:16, when Ananias talked to Paul right before his own baptism, he said, "Now why are you waiting? Arise and be baptized and wash away your sins, calling on the name of the Lord." The result is having your sin washed away. The power is not in the water. Power is with God. I've been called all kinds of things when it comes from the church besides a cult leader. That's my favorite. I was called a water dog and a salamander and a few other things. They said, "Because you believe water saves." And I said, "I absolutely do not." And they said, "What do you believe saves?" I said, "I believe absolutely that you are saved by grace through faith and you're asked to do something that saves you." And they said, "So you mean works?" I said, "Nope. It says not of works, so none of us can boast." And they said, "But you believe baptism saves?" I said, "Yes, I believe the one who is baptized will be saved." And they go, "So water saves?" And I said, "No, it doesn't." And we go around and around. 1 Peter 3:21 says, "There is also an antitype which saves us now, baptism." And he goes on to clarify. He says, "Not the removal of the filth of the flesh, but an answer of a good conscience toward God through the resurrection of Jesus Christ." It's not the water, it's what you do in obedience. The water doesn't have to be any special water. It doesn't have to be here. It could be in your bathtub at home if there's enough to cover the human body. It could be in a swimming pool, which I've seen so many faithful Christians begin in swimming pools. It could be in a hot tub, and that might be a little warm. It can be in the river, and that'll be a little cold. I have seen people walk out to a frozen lake with an axe and chip the ice away and put the person down in ice cold, frigid water because it is that important to get that action done in obedience. Because our formula today is the same. You believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of the living God and you are obedient to what he said and being baptized into Jesus Christ, and you receive healing, this time from sin and its penalty. He who believes and is baptized will be saved. Belief, obedience, salvation. That's all he was waiting for. So here's the chart that I started with. It's probably going to look a little different than yours, but that's okay. Because we started with a snake who had basically people who were snake bit. They were hopeless. They had Moses. They had the brazen serpent. They had to look at it. They looked. They lived. And it was not the snake that had the power, but God. And we see that belief plus obedience equaled healing. And we saw a man with leprosy who was hopeless, who talked to Elisha, who was told to go to the Jordan River for dipping, who was told to dip 7 times and absolutely dipped all 7 times. And when he came up, he was cleansed. And it was not the river, but it was God. So his belief plus his obedience was healing. And we saw a blind man at the pool who was hopeless, but he had Jesus. And he was told that the pool of Siloam was there for washing. And he put clay on his eyes and he washed the clay from his eyes in that pool. And after he washed, he obtained his sight. And it was not any power in the pool. It was with God. And his belief plus his obedience equaled healing. And for us today, our condition outside of Christ is sin. And we are hopeless without the Messiah, Jesus Christ. And our means for remission of sins is our provision, which is baptism for remission of sins. And once you are baptized, you are cleansed from sin. But it's not the water that's special. It's God who gives that power. By his authority, we can be saved. So our belief plus our obedience equals healing. So now maybe we understand better why it says in Hebrews 13:8, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. The scheme of redemption hasn't really changed. God told you to do something, you believed it and obeyed, and you got the reward, which was either healing or salvation. So if you have not been obedient to the call of Christ and being baptized for forgiveness of sins, I encourage you to put your belief into obedience and get it done so that you can be a Christian with us. If you have already gone through that as a Christian and maybe you're fallen away, maybe you're struggling with your faith, let someone know. Let us pray for you and help build you up in the faith. But whatever you need, whether it's to come to the Lord for the first time in baptism or return hopefully for the last time in repentance, let us take care of it as we stand and sing our song of encouragement together.
Careless soul, why will you linger, wandering from the holy cross?